My name is Jack Reynolds, and I thought I had the life most men dreamed of, a steady job, a house I built, and a wife I trusted implicitly. But everything changed the night I followed an ambulance to my front door and found a half-naked man lying on my porch. What I discovered next shattered more than my marriage. It shattered everything I believed in about loyalty, love, and justice. You think you've witnessed betrayal? You haven't heard. This is the story of how I disappeared after making him pay. It was nearly midnight when I pulled the clutch of my motorcycle and killed the engine. The roar died as I drove 200 yards down a quiet suburban road, letting the tires roll on the asphalt until I finally stopped. I slammed on the kickstand, climbed off, and looked around the neighborhood cautiously. There it was, Melissa's familiar two-story home glowing faintly from a back window. The porch was dark, just as I hoped. But it wasn't the house that had drawn me back tonight. It was the car. A silver 2015 Lexus, parked 2 houses down, its nose pointed toward the corner, trying too hard not to look suspicious. But I knew that car. I'd seen it before in photos online. Pastor Thomas Weller's pride and joy. That smug, phony man of God who thought he could sneak around behind my back with my wife. He wasn't sneaking tonight. He was here. I slipped through the side gate without a sound. The wood creaked just slightly as it closed behind me, but I didn't flinch. My heartbeat was steady. I walked quietly along the narrow path to the side of the house, the moonlight offering just enough light to guide me. My hand brushed against the base of the shed, where I had hidden the piece of seasoned oak days ago, just in case. Tonight was no accident. It was calculated. Deserved. I crouched beside the air conditioning unit and waited, oak in hand. The cold of the concrete seeped into my knees, but I didn't move. I wasn't even breathing heavy. I'd spent the last 3 weeks living in suspicion, slowly unraveling the lies Melissa had fed me. Working late. Bible study. Girls' night. Every excuse hollow, every kiss distant. The moment I found lipstick stains on the inside of a men's shirt in her gym bag, one I didn't own, I knew. Less than 5 minutes passed before I heard the sound I had been waiting for. Water gurgled from the gutter. Someone was in the shower. The front door creaked open a moment later. He stepped outside, buttoning his shirt in the dark, no doubt still basking in the self-righteous satisfaction of seducing a married woman. He didn't see me as I moved, low and silent, from my hiding place. He had no time to react. The first blow struck his knees. Hard. I felt the resistance of bone and cartilage under the wood, heard the soft thud as he crumpled to the ground with a groan. No scream, just a grunt. Maybe he didn't want to wake the neighbors. Maybe he couldn't. I didn't hesitate. The next swing cracked across his jaw. His body went limp, unconscious before he hit the cold stone walkway. I stood over him and took a deep breath. Then I got to work. One joint at a time. Elbows, wrists, ankles, knees. I moved efficiently, methodically, like a man hammering apart a broken table. I avoided the ribs and skull. This wasn't about killing him. No, this was a message. One written in fractures and agony. He never woke. I think I was almost disappointed. Not a single cry. No desperate plea. Just bones giving way and the occasional pop or crunch of tendons snapping like rubber bands. The sound of the kneecaps breaking echoed in the silent night, and I almost laughed at how surprised I was by the crispness of it. 2 minutes. That's all it took. 2 minutes to deliver justice where the law never could. I left him there on the path, barely breathing, and walked calmly back through the side gate. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. By the time I reached the bike, my adrenaline had cooled. I put the helmet back on, started the engine, and pulled out. The road was empty, just the hum of rubber and the whisper of wind. But then a siren. From behind. Flashing red lights in the rearview. An ambulance sped past me, the Doppler whine splitting the night. And oddly, it made my lips curl into a half-smile. I let the ambulance pull ahead and kept a steady distance behind it. I didn't have to guess where it was headed. It confirmed what I already knew. The bastard was still alive. Good. That was the plan. 3 blocks later, I turned the corner onto my street. My house, our house, was lit up like a crime scene on the evening news. Blue strobes pulsed from 3 police cruisers parked across the lawn and driveway. The ambulance I had followed had already arrived. Uniformed officers swarmed the property like ants over spilled sugar. I pulled into a spot across the street and shut the engine off, heart pounding, not from fear, but from fury. This This was what betrayal looked like under floodlights. I ran toward the house, shouting, "What the hell is going on?" One officer tried to stop me, but I dodged past him, hurling questions at no one in particular. "Where's Melissa? Who's that man? Why is he on my doorstep?" Another cop blocked my path, his hand extended. "Sir, please identify yourself. I live here. I'm Jack Reynolds. That's my wife in there. Now where the hell is she?" They stared at me like I was the criminal. My home, my wife, my life, now crawling with cops, and none of them would tell me a damn thing. My fists clenched, my jaw locked, but I forced myself to breathe. The show had only just begun. I wasn't sure what stunned me more, the red and blue lights flashing against the siding of my house, or the blank stares of officers who acted like I didn't belong there. I pushed past the last cop, ignoring his half-hearted attempt to block me. My voice cut through the buzz of radio chatter and murmured conversation. "Where the hell is Melissa? What happened here? And who the hell is that lying on my front steps?" An officer stepped into my path. "Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down and identify yourself." I glared at him. I did identify myself. "Jack Reynolds. I live here. The woman inside is my wife." He blinked, then motioned to someone with a radio. I took the distraction as an opening and darted around him, heading toward the front door. But two more officers moved in, trying to corral me like I was the one committing a crime. The irony burned in my throat. "Listen," I snapped. "I've just come home after a long drive, and now my entire front yard looks like a damn episode of CSI. You've got paramedics treating a half-dead man on my porch, and no one will tell me what the hell is going on. So unless you're planning to arrest me, get out of my way." One of them raised a hand, trying to de-escalate. "Sir, the lady of the house is inside, speaking with detectives. She's unharmed." Unharmed. That word rattled around in my skull like a cruel joke. So the one who actually invited this chaos into our home was safe and sound, while the man she'd snuck in behind my back was being wheeled into an ambulance. Perfect. At least I got confirmation. Melissa was alive. I pushed through the door, ignoring the remaining officers. The moment I stepped inside, I spotted her. She was seated on the edge of the sofa in the living room, her face streaked with tears, shoulders hunched like a child who'd been caught stealing from a candy jar. But this wasn't some innocent mistake. This was betrayal, raw, deliberate, and filthy. Two plainclothes detectives sat across from her, legal pads on their laps, pens moving slowly. One of them looked up at me. "Mr. Reynolds, we're going to need you to calm down." Calm. That word again. Everyone wanted me calm, but no one had the guts to tell me why my house was a crime scene. I walked straight to Melissa. "Why is there a man lying on my doorstep, Melissa? Who the hell is he?" She couldn't meet my eyes. She just buried her face in her hands and let out another wail. That sound, it was hollow. Practiced. Not grief. Not guilt. Just noise. I turned to the detectives. Well, one of them stood up, his voice low and measured. At 11:49 p.m., a 911 call was placed reporting a violent assault at this address. The responding unit arrived to find a male victim unconscious at your front door. He'd sustained multiple injuries. An ambulance was called. "Now we're trying to determine what happened here tonight." "And you think I did it," I said flatly. "Where were you between 11:30 and midnight?" I scoffed. "Driving back from Newcastle. Probably around the A605 junction when this happened. You think I had time to fly down the highway, beat the crap out of some guy, and then follow the ambulance in like a damn tourist?" The younger detective's pen froze in midair. The other one narrowed his eyes. "We'll need to verify that." "Be my guest," I said, folding my arms. "Check my mileage. GPS dash cam. Hell, check the dirt on my tires. But before you start building your case against me, maybe ask her why some strange man was half naked in my house while I was out earning money to pay the mortgage." Melissa let out another sob, as if the accusation wounded her more than the act itself. The audacity of it made my stomach churn. "I swear to God," I muttered. "If you find out who did this, tell him I owe him a beer." One of the detectives raised an eyebrow. "Sir, that's not helpful. Neither is this whole circus in my front yard." Another officer stepped inside and motioned toward me. "We'll need to check you over for blood or signs of a struggle." I didn't flinch. "Go ahead." Right there in front of everyone, I pulled off my sweatshirt, then my t-shirt. Jeans followed. I kicked off my boots and stood in my socks and boxers, arms outstretched like I was being crucified in my own home. "Anything else, officer?" I asked, meeting his gaze without blinking. He took a slow breath. Please put your clothes back on. No thanks, I replied. Not until I get a damn shower. I turned and walked toward the kitchen, passing the bar. I poured myself a tall glass of Jameson, stark naked, and downed it in one go. I could feel the weight of their stares, the discomfort, the confusion, the slow realization that I wasn't some reckless thug who'd lost control. I was calm, too calm, and that scared them more than anything else. The glass of whiskey hit my stomach like a firebomb, burning, biting, but oddly soothing. I poured another. The detectives behind me were murmuring now, voices low and anxious. I didn't care. The second glass slid down even easier than the first. As I raised the third, one of them stepped closer. Mr. Reynolds, the older one said, we need you to refrain from drinking. You'll be formally questioned soon. I turned, glass still in hand. You need. That's the second time you've said that tonight. You needed to search me, needed to inspect me for blood, and now you need me to stop drinking. Let me ask you something, Detective Barnes. Is anything in this house about what I need? He flinched slightly at the mention of his name. I kept going. Because what I needed was to come home and not find my front yard turned into a damn police parade. I needed a faithful wife. I needed a house that didn't reek of sweat and betrayal. I needed to not have to pour myself a drink just to keep from smashing the rest of this place to pieces. Barnes opened his mouth to speak, but I waved him off and headed toward the staircase. I didn't look at Melissa. I could still feel her in the room, her sobs soft and pitiful like a dying bird. I didn't care. I had barely reached the bottom stair when a sharp, nasal voice stopped me cold. Mr. Reynolds. I turned. A woman in a bright yellow forensic jumpsuit stood in the hallway, her clipboard pressed tightly against her chest. I need to examine you one more time. For any bruises, scratches, signs of struggle. I sighed, then raised both arms out wide. Knock yourself out. She moved quickly and clinically, checking my arms, neck, knuckles. Nothing. She swabbed the inside of my cheek, bagged my shirt and jeans, and declined my sarcastic offer to wash my back in the shower. I took that as permission and turned to leave. The bedroom was exactly as I had left it before the mattress was dragged out. Empty, lifeless, cold. But the smell hadn't gone. No, it still lingered, thick and sour. The stink of betrayal, sweat, cheap perfume, and whiskey-tainted lust. My gut twisted again, the same way it had when I first stepped into that room. I wanted to vomit. Instead, I opened the window, letting in the cool night air. Then I walked to the closet, yanked open the doors, and started grabbing everything that belonged to her. Dresses, lingerie, heels, purses. All of it went flying out the window like confetti in a nightmare parade. I didn't stop until the closet was empty. Not a single strap or sequin was spared. I was halfway through hurling her toiletries and hair products when I heard my name again. Mr. Reynolds. I turned, hand frozen mid-toss, a curling iron dangling from my fingers. Detective Barnes was standing in the doorway, his eyes wide and jaw tight. We need you to come with us to give a formal statement. Why? I said calmly, letting the iron clatter to the floor. You've got my statement. I told you exactly what happened. You haven't given it officially. I gave a thin, humorless smile. Unless you're arresting me, I'm not going anywhere. The tension in his face deepened. Mr. Reynolds, if you continue to obstruct. I stepped toward him. Obstruct? You walked into my home and treated me like a suspect, when the only thing I'm guilty of is being the poor bastard who didn't see the knife coming until it was halfway through his spine. He exhaled through his nose, clearly struggling to keep control. I could see the blood rising in his neck, his ears pinking up just like they had when I first mocked him downstairs. It was almost amusing, watching him try to maintain professionalism while rage simmered behind his eyes. You're giving me no alternative, he said finally, each word clipped and forced. I'm placing you under arrest on suspicion of assaulting Mr. Thomas Weller. There it was. I didn't resist, just nodded slowly, pulled on a fresh pair of jeans and a t-shirt, and slipped into my sneakers. Shall we? I said cheerfully, gesturing toward the door. As they led me out, I caught a glimpse of Melissa in the living room. Her hands were trembling in her lap. Her eyes met mine briefly, then dropped. Shame? Fear? Regret? I didn't care. I couldn't. I stopped just long enough to say, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Happy now? Pick up your trash and get out. Go to your mother's. Or back to the brothel you've been renting by the hour. She didn't respond, didn't move, just stared at the floor as I walked past her. Outside, the air felt cooler, cleaner. I was handed over to two officers and guided to the back of a squad car. One of them opened the door. Before I ducked inside, he glanced at me and muttered under his breath, "You really messed that guy up. Not that I blame you." I gave a cold smile, but my jaw clenched. "If I'd known about him earlier," I said quietly, "I'd have done worse." The back of the patrol car smelled like sweat and disinfectant, sterile, suffocating. The doors shut behind me with a mechanical clunk that made it clear I wasn't going anywhere until they let me. The drive to the station was quiet, except for the occasional crackle of the radio and the shallow breathing of the officer in the front passenger seat. He glanced at me once in the rearview mirror, but said nothing. Then finally, his partner broke the silence. "You really did a number on him." I didn't reply right away. My gaze was fixed on the blurred streetlights streaking past the window. My fists were clenched against my thighs, nails digging into skin. "Guy's lucky to be alive," he added, not looking back. "Is he, though?" I muttered. "You sure that kind of man deserves it?" Neither of them responded. We arrived at the station just before 2 a.m. I was booked, searched again, and led to an interview room with walls the color of damp ash and a camera staring down at me like an unblinking eye. I sat at the metal table, arms folded, refusing the bottle of water they offered. I didn't have to wait long before Detective Barnes walked in with his usual scowl and a folder under one arm. He dropped it on the table with a thud that was meant to be intimidating, but I just stared at it, then up at him. "You still want to waive your right to legal counsel?" he asked, already annoyed. "I've got nothing to hide," I said flatly. "Ask your questions. You won't like the answers." He sighed, opened the folder, and pressed record. "This interview is being conducted at 2:07 a.m. on charges of aggravated assault and grievous bodily harm, potentially escalating to attempted murder." I raised an eyebrow. Attempted murder? He still got his man parts, doesn't he? Barnes didn't appreciate the joke. "Where were you at 11:45 p.m., Mr. Reynolds?" I leaned back and gave him the same story I'd already told a dozen times. "Driving home from Newcastle. I left after completing a delivery and didn't stop once. I was heading down Huntington Road when an ambulance overtook me. Followed it all the way to my place." "And you expect us to believe that?" "I expect you to look at the evidence. GPS from my van. Delivery receipt. Signed, dated, and time-stamped. You want a copy? It's sitting in the glove box." He didn't say anything, just stared at me like he was trying to peel away layers of my skin with his eyes. It didn't work. I stared right back. "Why didn't you mention this earlier?" he asked. "Why didn't you ask?" I shot back. "You were too busy trying to get me naked in my living room to care where I'd actually been." He muttered something under his breath, probably about me being difficult. I didn't care. That was his problem, not mine. "You think just because you've got some paperwork, you're off the hook?" I shrugged. "Let me make it real simple for you, detective. If I had known that my wife was spreading her legs for some holy hypocrite, and I happened to catch him in the act, you'd be investigating a corpse. But since Pastor Weller's still breathing, still whining in a hospital bed, it clearly wasn't me." His face twisted with restrained anger. "Do you think this is a game?" "No," I replied, calm as ice. "But you're clearly losing it." He slammed the folder shut and stood. Interview suspended. He stormed out, leaving me alone again. I let out a slow breath and leaned forward, resting my head on folded arms. I was exhausted. I hadn't slept in over 24 hours. Not since before everything fell apart. The door creaked open again 15 minutes later. This time, Barnes looked different, less sure, less righteous. He had a slip of paper in his hand. "Your alibi checks out. Time-stamped delivery. You were 252 miles away when the assault happened." I smirked. "Glad you're finally catching up." His jaw clenched. "You're free to go, but don't leave town." "No problem," I said, rising to my feet. "My home's still full of police tape and shame. I've got nowhere to be." By the time I got back to the house, the sun was starting to bleed into the sky. My keys were still inside, so I knocked. Melissa answered, looking like she hadn't slept a minute either. Her eyes were red, lips trembling. "Jack, I'm so sorry." I walked past her without a word. The house was still a mess. Her clothes were strewn across the yard and into the neighbors' hedges. The scent in the bedroom still hadn't left. I went to the shed, grabbed the gas can, and dragged the soiled mattress into the backyard. Melissa watched from the back door, silent, frozen in place. I tossed her clothes on top, doused the pile with gasoline, and stood back. No, she whispered, stepping forward. Please don't. I struck a match. The flame flickered, hungry. You said you loved me, Melissa, I said, voice low. But you never meant it. She reached out, desperate. I didn't think. No. I interrupted, eyes locked on hers. You didn't think I mattered. I dropped the match. Flames swallowed the past in seconds. The fire roared behind me, casting an orange glow that danced on the back wall of our home, my home. I stood still, watching it consume every remnant of the bed we once shared. Melissa sobbed behind me, begging me to stop, pleading with that same cracked voice she used every time she wanted something without earning it. I didn't even turn around. I just watched her lies turn to ash. By the time the mattress collapsed into a smoldering pile of blackened springs and charred cotton, I was already dialing numbers. My hands trembled, but not from emotion, just from the exhaustion of holding it all in for too long. Rage is heavy when it has nowhere to go. Back inside, the air was thick with the stench of gasoline and burned fabric. Melissa trailed after me like a ghost, murmuring empty apologies. I ignored her, walked straight to the kitchen, poured myself another glass of Jameson, and leaned against the counter. The clock on the microwave blinked 6:13 a.m. Jack, she whispered behind me. Please. I didn't want this to happen. I turned slowly. Her face was streaked with tears and smoke, her hands trembling like she was the victim. You didn't want this? I said, voice low. You invited it. You made the bed. I just burned it. I left her standing there and walked up the stairs, every step heavier than the last. I needed a shower, more than just for the sweat and stink of the station. I needed to wash away the filth she brought into my home. Steam rose quickly as I cranked the water to scalding. The pain felt good, cleansing. As the water pounded down, my mind spun. One thought kept repeating. I need to make sure this never happens again. No more mercy. No more forgiveness. No more pretending. When I stepped out, towel around my waist, the air felt lighter, not because things were better, but because I'd accepted they never would be. Downstairs, Melissa sat curled on the couch, a cup of untouched coffee in her hands. I stared at her for a long moment before speaking. Who is he? She didn't answer, just kept her eyes on the cup. Melissa, I repeated sharper. What's his name? She sniffled, looked up like a frightened child, and whispered, Thomas. Thomas Weller. Of course. The phony pastor. The moral compass of the community. The man who shook my hand at barbecues while undressing my wife with his eyes. The same one who told people from the pulpit that marriage was sacred. I should have broken his damn spine, I muttered. Melissa stood suddenly, panicked. Jack, please. He didn't mean to. Didn't mean to? I barked. He didn't trip and fall into your bed, Melissa. She flinched. I didn't care. I was done cushioning the truth. I walked to the phone, dialed the hospital, and asked for information about Thomas Weller. They wouldn't give me details, of course, privacy laws and all that. But I asked one simple question. Is anyone there with him? Yes, his wife, the nurse said. Bingo. Can you put her on the phone? I asked politely. A few seconds later, a soft voice came on the line. This is Rachel Weller. Who's calling? Hi, Rachel, I said calmly. My name is Jack Reynolds. We haven't met, but I know your husband. He knows my wife a bit better, though. There was silence on the line. I could feel the weight of it as she tried to process what I was saying. I continued, you might want to meet my wife. Maybe somewhere more private than a hospital ward. You know, woman to woman. You could swap stories. Maybe recipes. Discuss the size and performance of the man who somehow convinced both of you that he was worth a damn. A sharp inhale came from the other end, followed by a strained voice. Where do you live? I gave her the address, along with my personal cell number, then added, I'll put the kettle on. Melissa stared at me, her jaw hanging slightly open, eyes wide. You didn't, she whispered. Oh, I did, I said, pouring myself another drink. Now you get to look her in the eye and tell her how little her life mattered to you. I wasn't finished. I wanted her shame to have witnesses. 10 minutes later, tires screeched outside. I opened the door before Rachel could knock. She was tall, lean, mid-40s, wearing a simple navy blouse and black flats. Her face was pale, but her eyes were blazing. She stepped inside like a storm. Is it true? She asked, her voice trembling with controlled rage. Melissa backed up a step. It's not like. Crack. Rachel's slap echoed through the room like a gunshot. Don't you dare lie to me, she snapped. You cheated with my husband. I didn't mean, Melissa tried again. You didn't mean to sleep with him? Didn't mean to bring him here? Didn't mean to undress in our house? She was relentless, her words like knives. I watched silently, sipping my drink, as Melissa wilted under the fury of the woman she had betrayed. For the first time, I saw her realize what she'd done to someone else. Rachel turned to me, eyes full of pain. Thank you. I raised my glass. Coffee. She smiled through her tears. Coffee sounds great. Rachel and I sat across from each other in the kitchen, two strangers bound by the same knife in our backs. Between us sat a pair of steaming mugs, untouched, growing cold. Neither of us cared about the coffee. The only thing hot in that room was the fury still burning beneath the surface. Hers, mine, and the ashes of the life I once thought I had. Melissa lingered in the hallway like a shadow no one invited. I heard her pacing, heard her sniffles. Every few minutes, she would inch closer to the kitchen, only to retreat again. Maybe she wanted to explain herself, again. Maybe she wanted to hear if Rachel would forgive her more easily than I had. Either way, she didn't have the nerve to step inside. Do you know how long we've been married? Rachel asked, staring at her cup. I shook my head. 17 years, she said, eyes distant. We met at university. I helped put him through seminary. Worked double shifts while he studied scripture. I gave him everything. And he gave me this. Her voice cracked at the end, but no tears fell. She was long past crying. Her pain had calcified into something sharper, something that could cut. I respected that. I didn't know, she continued, until the hospital called. I thought he was at a conference. But when I saw the address in the report, she didn't have to finish. The truth sat in the air between us, thick and rotting. My house, our shared battlefield. I always suspected, she said quietly. The late nights. The private counseling sessions. But I told myself he was doing the Lord's work. I told myself that if I doubted him, it was my own sin. Turns out, I muttered, he was laying hands on the congregation in more ways than one. Rachel gave a bitter laugh, then covered her mouth like she couldn't believe it escaped. He'll live, she said. The doctors say he'll walk again, eventually. Pity, I replied. I was aiming for a lesson in humility. She gave me a long look. Did you do it? I didn't answer immediately, just stared back. If I did, he'd be dead. She nodded slowly. Fair. Melissa crept into view, hovering just outside the doorframe like a child waiting to be scolded. Rachel turned toward her, her tone low but deadly. You chose this. Don't you dare cry like you tripped and fell into sin. Don't act like this happened to you. You invited it into your bed, into his arms, into this house. I made a mistake, Melissa whimpered. No, Rachel snapped. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. What you did was a choice. Melissa's eyes darted to me, searching for some crack of sympathy. She found none. Rachel stood, fixing her blouse. I hope you're ready to care for him. You'll need to feed him, bathe him, wipe his ass for months. Maybe longer. That's what he left me for, a nursemaid with no spine. She looked back at me, her voice gentler. Thank you for the coffee. I walked her to the door. As I opened it, she paused and turned. If I'd done what you did, I wouldn't regret a thing. She walked away, chin high, shoulders squared. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her disappear down the street, and felt something strange, almost like closure. But it didn't last. Behind me, Melissa began to speak again. Jack, please. I know I've hurt you, but... I held up a hand, not even turning around. Don't. She fell silent. I stepped outside and walked to the front yard. The pile of her clothes had scattered across the lawn and the hedges. I began gathering them, not out of kindness, but to finish what I had started. Back in the yard, I threw them on top of the blackened remains of the mattress. Her heels, her bras, even her perfume bottles, every symbol of the life we'd built, poisoned by the man she'd let defile it. I reached into the shed for the green gas can and began pouring. When she saw what I was doing, she ran from the house, her face pale. No, Jack, please. Don't burn it. Don't do this. Got a light? I asked coldly. And not the red one you hang outside when I'm not home. Her knees buckled, but I didn't wait for a reply. I lit another match, just like before. Don't, Jack. Please. I'm sorry. I love you. I looked her dead in the eyes. You don't even know what love means. The match dropped. Flames exploded again, leaping into the early morning air like judgment itself. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she cried. "No," I said. "You just didn't think you'd get caught." She stepped back, trembling, watching everything turn to smoke and ruin. Her past, her secrets, her control, gone in a blaze she could never contain. And as the fire roared once more, I knew I was finally reclaiming something she could never touch again. My dignity. The fire had died down to a smoldering heap by the time I stepped back inside. The house smelled of gasoline and scorched cotton, but I didn't mind. It masked the far worse scent I'd lived with for weeks: perfume and betrayal. Melissa was still in the yard, collapsed near the charred mess, her arms wrapped around herself like they could protect her from the damage she'd caused. I didn't care where she went. Whether she slept on the lawn or dragged herself to a friend's couch didn't matter. I had only one thing left to do: bury the last piece of this nightmare before the sun climbed too high and I lost the clarity the dawn had brought me. I booted up my laptop in the living room and started searching for divorce lawyers. Most were closed, Saturday hours, of course, but that didn't stop me from making a list. I wanted the best. Someone ruthless. Someone who could tear through every lie Melissa had told and leave her with nothing but memories of what she used to have. Footsteps shuffled behind me. "I made coffee," she said softly, holding a mug in her trembling hands. I looked at her, really looked at her. Dark circles under her eyes, cheeks streaked with dried tears, her nightgown stained with ash. The image of her standing there, trying to act like things could return to normal, made something inside me twist. It wasn't pity. It was revulsion. Who was he, really? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. I just wanted to hear it from her lips. Wanted her to speak her filth into the air and choke on it. "His name's Thomas," she whispered. "Thomas Weller. Pastor Weller," I said flatly. "Your spiritual advisor." She winced. "It wasn't supposed to happen, Jack." "But it did happen," I said, rising from my seat. "In our bed. In our house. While I was out breaking my back, trying to keep this place together." Tears spilled down her cheeks again. "It was just once." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Just once? You think that makes it better? You think that erases the scent of him from our sheets, the fingerprints he left on your skin?" She covered her face with her hands. "I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't think I mattered enough to hurt," I snapped. I turned away before I said something that would carry consequences beyond this house. I needed out. I needed distance before her sobs made me forget how cruel she'd been. Then I remembered Rachel. I walked back to the phone and redialed the hospital. After a brief back and forth, I was transferred to Thomas's room. "This is Rachel Weller," a voice answered. "Rachel," I said calmly. "Jack Reynolds again. Just thought you might like to finish that conversation in person." "You still at the house?" she asked. "Yes. I'll be there in 10. And she was. Tires screeched against the curb as she pulled up, faster than I expected. I opened the front door before she reached it, half worried she'd kick it down if I didn't. She stormed in, her face red with fury. "Where is she?" she barked. Melissa tried to retreat, but Rachel caught her in the hallway like a hawk descending on prey. "You think you can destroy 2 families and then cry your way out of it?" Rachel hissed. "You think being sorry undoes what you did? My husband can't walk, can barely feed himself. And you stand here like a child caught stealing cookies." Melissa trembled. "We didn't mean." "Stop saying that," Rachel shouted, voice slicing through the house. "You meant it. You meant every word you whispered to him. Every lie you told to cover your tracks. You invited him into this home, into his home," she added, pointing at me. "And you laughed behind his back." "I didn't laugh," Melissa whispered. "I was confused." "No," Rachel said coldly. "You were greedy. And now you'll take care of the man you ruined your life for. You'll wipe his mouth and help him piss until he remembers how to do it himself." She turned to me, softened. "Thank you, Jack. I didn't think I'd ever get to say any of that." I nodded, glad I could help. Then Rachel faced Melissa one last time. "You think this is over? It's not. Because you'll live with what you've done every single day. And he'll never look at you the way he did before. Not after this." With that, she left. Melissa collapsed onto the stairs, a shaking wreck. I watched her for a moment, watched the pieces of her unravel and scatter like ashes on the lawn. Then I walked into the backyard again. The pile was still warm. I found a few more of her things, forgotten clothes, a framed photo of us from better days, and tossed them onto the embers. She screamed behind me. Please, Jack, stop. I lit another match. You burned this marriage the moment you opened that door for him, I said. And I dropped it. The flames flared one last time, devouring the remnants of our past. Our wedding photo, her perfume, the soft pink cardigan I once bought her for our anniversary. All of it turned to smoke and memory in the early morning light. Melissa screamed as if I were burning her skin instead of her belongings, but I didn't flinch. I just stood there, watching it all disintegrate, piece by piece. When the fire finally died down to a soft, smoldering black heap, I turned and walked back into the house without a word. Melissa didn't follow. I think even she knew this was the end. I sat in silence, staring at the floor, letting the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. My world, my marriage, my trust, it had all been torn apart in a single night, and now I had nothing left to cling to but the truth. And the truth was, I had been played for a fool. She was still outside when I called the divorce lawyer. I found one listed as aggressive, with a reputation for gutting cheaters like trout. Exactly what I needed. I left a message, name's Jack Reynolds. I want full divorce proceedings started Monday morning. No reconciliation. No counseling. No mercy. Once I hung up, I went upstairs, changed into clean clothes, and packed a bag. I wasn't staying here, not another night under that roof. Let her rot in the ashes of what she destroyed. When I came back down, she was in the living room, wiping her face with shaking hands. Her voice was hoarse, her tone desperate. Jack, please. I'm sorry. I didn't think. You didn't think I mattered, I said, cutting her off without looking at her. You didn't think about anything except what you wanted in that moment. You wanted him, and you took him. She stumbled toward me. It was a mistake. Just one night. I wasn't going to see him again. I finally turned to face her. You said it yourself. He was in our bed. You think that happens by accident. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Just a soft, broken sound. I buried that mattress, Melissa, I said coldly. I buried you with it. I left her standing there as I grabbed my bag and walked out the front door. I didn't slam it. I didn't scream. I didn't need to. The silence was louder than any goodbye I could have spoken. 14 months passed. The divorce was finalized in just under 6. I didn't contest custody of anything. There were no kids. But there was one surprise waiting at the end of it all. Melissa was pregnant. Twins. Do not long after the separation. But they weren't mine. DNA testing proved that beyond any doubt. Poetic justice. I wasn't legally responsible for a single diaper, and I thanked every higher power that she had tied herself to the man who had destroyed our marriage. Only, he wasn't much of a man anymore. Pastor Thomas Weller was still in physical therapy, still relying on nurses to help him dress and eat. I heard through the grapevine that his congregation had cut ties, and his church board had quietly replaced him. As for Melissa, she tried to reach out a few times. Letters. Voicemails. One email begging me to meet the kids just once. I never replied. I didn't need to. The message had already been delivered. And Detective Barnes? He pulled me in for questioning twice more in the months that followed. Still trying to find out who really laid into the pastor that night. I kept my answers short. Polite. Dismissive. He knew he had nothing. No evidence. No witnesses. Just a gut feeling he couldn't prove. There was a lot I didn't tell him. I didn't tell him that my old friend Rick Stanton had come by the house 2 weeks before it all went down, and that Melissa had answered the door wearing lingerie she never wore for me. I didn't tell him that Rick had waited outside, smoking a cigarette by his bike, and happened to witness Pastor Weller pulling into my driveway. I didn't tell him that Rick had met me later in Newcastle, with a second motorcycle and a burner phone, or that we'd swapped vehicles in a back alley, him taking my van and GPS while I rode back toward home on a Hayabusa fast enough to make the timeline fuzzy. I didn't tell him that after the incident, I had met Rick again just a few miles away, stripped off my disposable clothes, tossed them in a river, and got back in my van just in time to follow that ambulance home like a worried husband. I certainly didn't tell him that I'd stood over Weller with a piece of oak in my hand, reminding him, between cracks and splinters, what happens to men who touch another man's wife. Some truths are better left unsaid. Now, when I walk down the street, people nod. Some shake my hand. They don't ask questions. They know what happened without knowing the details. And that's how I prefer it. Because justice isn't always about handcuffs and trials. Sometimes, justice comes in the form of a man reclaiming what was stolen, his dignity, his name, and his peace. And when I sleep now, I sleep just fine. Looking back, I've come to realize that betrayal doesn't just shatter trust. It exposes the truth about the people we thought we knew. What Melissa did forced me to confront a painful lesson. Love without respect is just an illusion, and forgiveness without accountability is a trap. For those of us who've lived long enough to see joy, loss, and the quiet erosion of marriage over time, this story isn't just about infidelity. It's about reclaiming self-worth. We give so much of ourselves in relationships that we sometimes forget our value. But dignity, once lost, is worth fighting to regain. I learned that boundaries matter, that silence in the face of betrayal is a slow death, and that sometimes walking away, no matter how late in life, is the most courageous thing we can do. For anyone in their later years wondering if it's too late to start again, let me tell you, it never is. You deserve peace. You deserve honesty. And most of all, you deserve a life that honors the years you've given. I may have walked through fire, but I came out clean on the other side. So can you.